When you go abroad, the reality is that you're just exchanging one set of problems for another. In 2013, I finished graduate school with my master's in teaching. I kind of fell into education, and I got my first job in Lexington, Kentucky, and I won't tell you what school. And after I tell you the story, you'll know why. It was difficult. Kentucky has a process called K-TIP, and I don't remember what it stands for, but it's a pretty rigorous hazing process that they put first-year teachers through to really ensure that teachers know what they're doing. And it adds a lot of work to people who are already amazingly busy and taxed and probably exhausted as well, like I was. It was a difficult year teaching. To be honest, it wasn't fun at all. But none of that really matters. Just at the end of the year, I kind of knew what was coming. The principal and I, we had gotten along. We were both baseball fans, even though he was a Cincinnati fan. I was a Tampa Bay fan. The school itself was pretty low SES, so I came in teaching 5th grade math, and the kids for the last few years prior had tested at about 14% proficiency, and this was on the tail end of No Child Left Behind. So schools were getting report cards that were affecting funding and were also affecting teacher retention. The principal called me in at the very end of the year after we had spent days cleaning the classrooms and, getting them prepped for summer cleaning. And I just kind of knew what was going to happen. And he told me, I'm sorry, the test scores are just too low. The kids scored the same as they had the years past, 14% proficiency. And I have to let you go. And it was kind of devastating for about 10 seconds. And then I thought, well, I'll move back to Florida. That's where I'm from. Move back to Florida, right? I was driving through Kentucky, and I stopped at some friends' houses and they're like, hey, I lost my job too. He taught 5th grade at another primary school in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And he says, they let me go. Don't know why. They didn't even give him a reason. Principal always indicated that he liked him a lot. Got on well with other teachers. He says, but we're going back to China. You want to come with us? We were there from 2007, 2009. We've got a job lined up. We can tell our boss, hey, we're only coming if you bring coal also. And I thought, I'm 27 years old. Why not? No, I was 29. I'm 29 years old at that time. Why not, right? And so on my way down to Florida to go home, I decided this is the last chance I have to go somewhere else in the world before I get old and settle down. Right, so I went abroad. I was burnt out from teaching. After being fired, I just decided I didn't want to do it. It was not a fun year. I mean, you have behavior problems with the kids. You have parents who are unsupportive. I remember I was attacked, not physically, but by one of the grandmothers on opening night. When we have meet the teacher before school even started, and she comes to me and she's like, what are you going to do if my boy doesn't do his homework? And I'm like, are you planning on him not doing his homework? I mean, yeah, I have interventions in my back pocket that I'll pull out when we need, but I don't know your kid, right? I don't know his history. What should I be prepping for? What do you want me to say? And what are you going to do if he's not going to do his homework? Aren't you going to make him sit at the table and do his homework? What do you want me to do? Go to your house and hold his hand, make him do his homework? There were a lot of confrontations like that. And aside from all the behavioral things, there were a lot of in-school politics that also kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And then just getting up early not having enough time to plan. You never have enough time to plan as a teacher. You never have enough time to grade papers as a teacher. And I thought, after this year, like I got my master's in teaching, but I'm not going to use it. I'm not doing this. Like, there is absolutely no way I can continue like taking work home, grading on Saturdays, just being absolutely exhausted at the end of the day, having spent all of your emotional capital on anywhere between 20 and 30 10 and 11-year-olds, and then coming home and like at that time I'm single. My girlfriend eventually broke up with me towards the end of my first year teaching. I thought, this is just enough, right? This is the same this is the same story as like thousands of other teachers. It's too much. You put 20 to 30 kids in a room and you expect teachers to like have some sort of magical effect. Not only that, to do so well and then to be able to go home afterwards and still be normal. This is part of the cultural problem in teaching. And you go abroad and you think to yourself, either before you go abroad or on the way or when you get there, it's going to be different. And it's not. That's not true at all. It's different in terms of maybe the variables. But the reality is that when you go abroad, you're just exchanging one set of problems for another. So, when I first arrived at the school, right, when I first arrived in Shanghai, I didn't even know where the school was. And I was supposed to attend staff orientation 2 or 3 days after I had arrived. Didn't know where to go. Walked around until someone found me and was like, "Hey, I think you're one of the new teachers." Like, yes, I am one of the new teachers. Why don't you come join us? I think you're teaching first grade with us. Great. And it wasn't even the school that I had applied to join. A week before I arrived, 1 week before I arrived in Shanghai, I got an email from the person who hired my friends and I. Cole, we're so glad that we have an experienced teacher such as yourself with a master's degree coming in. And we're so excited that we're actually going to place you at a new school that we helped to start, a private bilingual school. And this kind of communication was new to me. And after that first year teaching at that school, being involuntarily moved there, I kindly requested to move back to the school for which I was originally hired. Regardless, I was in first grade, and I was handed my schedule, and a first time looking at it, I was prepared to be with these kids all day. Instead, I was teaching 2 classes a day, maybe 3 classes a day at most, initially. And the rest of the time, I was supposed to be at my desk grading papers, preparing lessons, and I thought, wow, I have time to do teaching things. I had emotional capital that was immediately restored. Most people, I think, would love teaching in this situation, comparing the differences between what happens in the States and what happens here in China. And I'm not contradicting myself, but in all reality, you just exchange one set of problems for another. The private school industry, and I say industry in other parts of the world, and not just private school, but international school and bilingual school, it's an economic phenomenon. So it happened because parents demanded it, because parents wanted it, and because businessmen knew it was possible to build these schools. And as such, whereas in the United States, we have politics between administrators who don't like teachers, teachers who don't like administrators, We have bureaucratic bloat. You can have the exact same thing here, except it comes from strictly a market perspective now. So yes, classroom teaching job was easier. But then on the other side, infrastructure, oh boy. So I want you to imagine for a moment that there is absolutely no human resources. I want you to imagine, secondly, that if a student's being abused in some way, in many schools, there's no real recourse for that because we're dealing with a blossoming out of a market phenomenon that doesn't have an educational, pastoral, well-being mindset to take care of kids, even though parents highly respect teachers and are generally on their side in a place like China. So you have these issues, and then you also have very, very, very heavy top-end administration, which means that a tremendous amount of principals and vice principals, and then middle managers are nothing more than earpieces and mouthpieces to pass down that which is established by the higher ups. And if you've ever studied business management, you know that successful business is always run on feedback loops, meaning that people down below can say things that can reach the ears of people above, and people up above will listen, process, think, pass down information through chains of command to people back below. And there's a loop of information where people are constantly getting feedback, and they at least feel like they're being heard and listened to. And you don't have that here. So in the past, or at least in the United States, you can go to your principal and you can give them an earful. And they're, in a lot of sense, in charge. Sometimes they pass it on to a district coordinator or the superintendent or something like that. But you can bet that you're in touch with somebody who has a meaningful place in administration. Here, it's not the case. Not the case at all. But this idea that the grass is always greener on the other side, this is one of our most common fallacies. Our problem is that we see our work in terms of problems and solutions. If I could just alleviate this one difficulty, things would be so much easier. And there are times when that's true. In fact, just last week, I had 2 students who were out at the beginning of the semester. And I really enjoy these students. But they were out. And immediately the students come into school, and they come into our classroom, and they follow the morning procedures perfectly. They hand in their homework, they put their backpacks away, and they have quiet conversations for a couple minutes. Everybody greets each other, and they sit down and they start reading a book, all of them, for an entire week straight. And then the moment these 2 students come back, they completely alter the tenor of the classroom. And we tend to think things like, if I could just get rid of such and such, these 2 students, or that administrator, or this particular policy, then things will be so much easier. But I think the fact is that everywhere you go, you have that. Everywhere you go, you have those 1 or 2 or 5 variables that you just want to get rid of. And the reality is that work cultures are always imperfect. And one of the reasons is because they are never organically born, or at least very rarely organically born. In education, they're almost always artificially constructed, meaning that somebody thought it was a good idea to do it like this, or a group of people thought it was a good idea to build a school this way, and they do. And it's usually a top-down sort of scenario. So the people who actually do most of the work have the least amount of say. That will not change. That will never change. The grass is not greener on the other side. The grass on the other side is just different kinds of grass, right? No pun intended. It's just a different field. And sometimes the hurdle of crossing the fence to get to the other side is rewarding enough. But also, if you're not careful, it can be just as deflating. In each situation, you have different kinds of people. And, we expect people to at least be different in these scenarios. And yeah, people from different cultures are very different. Most of the time, there's still some heavy similarities and heavy overlap with whatever culture you're from. But what is absolutely true is that cultures are different. So you want to figure out, like, do I go abroad, and how do I not make a decision to go abroad with any sort of illusion about what going abroad actually is? You have to compare cultures. You have to compare work cultures. You have to compare localized communities, how they work, how groceries are handled. You have to compare economic cultures. You have to compare social cultures at large, as difficult as that may be. You have to, because you want to make a good decision, right? You don't just want to go. Maybe you do, but if you want to make a good decision, you think through as many factors as you can without, going into analysis paralysis. And the thing is, like, some cultures are just horrible, right? Some cultures treat women horribly. And I think we can say that those are not good cultures, or at least those are not cultures we want to be a part of. Some cultures disdain children, or they disdain the elderly, right? They disdain men, right? We want a culture that's going to treat people well. So how do the cultures compare? You need to ask this question. You need to figure out, you need to have a mechanism to kind of approach both of this. And the question of cultures is ultimately a question of values, because it comes down to what you value most. Our problem is we look at things, I think, in terms of convenience, and this is my problem now. It's because I've been out of the United States so long that this was my mindset then, and my mindset now is, altered. And do you want that? Do you want your mindset to be altered? I don't think like an American anymore. When I lived in the United States, my thought process was in terms of convenience. How convenient will it be? How easy will it be for me to go to another place? I'd interviewed for a school in South Korea, actually. And my cousin had lived on, a military base there. And I asked this question: how easy will it be for me to get along or get around not knowing the language? How easy will it be for me to go to the movie theater? That bespeaks my values. That's my value, right? Which culture will deliver the goods for me? But the problem with this approach is that you're a part of your culture, right? And so you have to accept the fact that you're doing two things at once. You're trying to criticize, in a good way, your own culture, and also criticize another culture so that you can try to compare apples and oranges. Because the real issue is that I'm a product of my culture. So there's no such thing as a bird's eye perspective. There's just nothing about that. It doesn't exist. I can't remove myself from my culture. My way of thinking, my way of living and acting, and yours, it's not entirely deterministic, but it is shaped by the fact that you participate in the daily life of your culture. And it's so subtle that you probably can't even begin to parse out the ways in which you do it. And it changes so slowly. And that is when you go to other cultures and encounter something called culture shock. Is because you don't have an internal mechanism to register these kinds of differences that you never knew were actually logical for you, but were not based in any sort of reasoning. They're just based in practice and action. Families work this way. Men and women speak this way. Children speak this way. We do these things outside and inside the home, and then all of a sudden you go to another culture and you realize, no, that doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. So you still have to kind of force yourself to stand outside your culture in a sense. But at the same time, you have to realize you're tethered to it. So I think a lot of people will say that they feel out of place. They feel out of place in their culture. I think to be honest, that's just normal. It's normal for everybody to not feel like they're exactly centered in their culture. They're out here, tethered to it in some way that either they don't like or they like. If you don't feel that way right now, then you have at some point. And if you haven't felt that way, you absolutely will. But it doesn't mean that you burn the whole house down or jump ship. For some people, it means you help to course correct, right? The thing is cultures have strata. And by strata, I mean layers, kind of what I mentioned earlier. And this is one big difference is that you'll look at a place like China and you'll think that the largest strata, the largest layer is actually the governmental layer. And that's only because the government puts upon itself this moral and ethical obligation to teach people values. Whereas in the United States, we don't have that. It's completely absent. So everything is left up primarily to families and more local communities. But the individual, you or me, are the most granular and I think the most important part of any given culture. You're part of the strata. You're part of the layers of the culture. You can't remove yourself from it, but you can make slow shifts over time. And feeling out of place is actually quite normal within a culture. How does your culture handle that? Do you think you would be well off being out of place in another culture as opposed to your own culture? The illusion is that the grass is greener on the other side, that you would fit in over there. The reality is you won't. The reality is it's just as hard to get along in another culture as it is in your own. So you're disgruntled in your own culture, maybe be disgruntled, right? You're unhappy with your job, with job security, with economic conditions, all of this, right? Be unhappy, but contextualize it. These are problems. Are you able to make the trade-off to accept those problems in place of to face problems from another culture in place of the ones that you have? Are you willing to take on a brand new set of problems that you don't even know what they are yet and replace the ones at least that you do know? Don't think this idea that because you're too young or too old that you should or should not move abroad. This narrative has just been driven more than I'd like to see. And I used to think this. And after having been abroad for 12 or more years, I can tell you it's all nonsense. Absolutely pointless to think this way. Going abroad younger may be easier. Going abroad older may be more difficult. But there's no such thing as too young or too old. The real question is, what types of problems do I face in my life right now? And am I in a spot where I can exchange those for another set of problems? There's no such thing as starting over. And that's one of the other illusions of moving abroad. There's no such thing as starting over. There's only taking the problems you have now and exchanging them for another set of problems. And worse than that, taking the problems you have now and putting them in a backpack and taking them with you to a new place where there are also other problems. Because you can't just leave problems in a place. Some of them you can. Economic problems, maybe. Maybe you're in a situation where all you can do is rent, you can't purchase a home. But then other problems. You and your sister don't talk to each other anymore. You and your family members are estranged, right? Estrangement doesn't feel any better when you're in another place. Instead, you have to think of what trade-off are you willing to make? The grass is not greener on the other side. It's just another place to live. If you thought this was interesting, do me a favor and like or subscribe for the next episode as we explore something a little bit different about living abroad.